Hello and welcome back. It's me, Bill and Dave, and obviously you're not tired of us yet. So welcome back. This is going to be fun. And today's topic is really something I think that's underrated in the tennis world, period. Just in the tennis world, underrated and not appreciated enough. And if you come to an appreciation of this one thing, you're going to have a lot more fun coaching, and it is team cohesion, unity, togetherness, whatever you want to call it. So, um, you know, both Dave and I have had wonderful experiences with teams that were 100% united, good experiences with teams that weren't 100% that way, and some bad, bad seasons with kids and players and teams and parents who just didn't really go along with the program. So, Dave, where should we begin when it comes to team unity?
Well, let's identify the fact that if you're not prepared well through communication, expectations, identification of what you define as not only team unity, but a culture of togetherness, a culture of making sure every player, and as you and I talked about this a second ago, Bill, that is every team is different. So you're going to have different factors that create maturity levels, that have expectations, that have egos, that have no egos, that have parents who are over the top, helicoptering parents, or parents who think they know everything, or some parents who don't do anything except whine and complain. So I'm going to start by saying team unity, as you said, is underrated. And I do consider the fact that all my success over the 45 years of coaching was probably driven, and I've learned this more the longer I coach, by the fact that I created greater and greater magnitude of communicating the need for team unity, expectations, personal accountability and responsibility from both parents and players. And what are the ramifications if somebody creates disunity or creates a problematic situation where they're backstabbing somebody on the team or undermining your authority? Those are things that you've got to be aware of before the season begins. So I'll leave it at that as far as just a mindset of saying, look, make sure you've covered as many things, and there'll be things that you'll like, there's something I didn't think about. And so I'll just say communicating through both a parent and a player's packet of information that you're going to hand out on day one, and to every new player that comes out, that describes your expectations, the expectations of each player, and the parental. A lot of coaches forget the parents are part of the either good process or bad process.
Yeah. While you were talking, I was thinking about this Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. quote. And he said, and I think he might have been quoting somebody else, but he said, a threat to liberty anywhere in the world is a threat to liberty everywhere in the world. And man, I wish more people lived with that in mind these days. But anyway, but if we take that as like a blueprint, a threat to unity anywhere on your team is a threat to unity everywhere on your team. So I think the number one thing is you have to realize that the number one thing that you have to do is deal with those things that are a threat to unity, right? And so it could be a player who holds themselves aloof. I liked how you were talking about personal responsibility, because it could be the effort level of one or a few, or it could have to do a little bit with the respect that players show each other, and then civility, because it's unrealistic to think that all of your players are going to become best friends. They will not, and you're going to have two players on your team, if you have a big enough team, who probably, if given the choice, would not hang out together, right? But they might end up being doubles partners, so they have to get along. Um, so, don't be unrealistic. On the other hand, it's good to take these things head on at the beginning. So, like for instance, one of the things that I do is, especially if I'm a new coach or I'm getting a new player coming onto my team, um, is I make sure that my team captains and my number one player are very good examples, because then that gives you something to point to, and you can say, look at the maturity of our number one player, look at their work ethic, look at our captains, look how much they care for everybody on the team, and they're spreading the love and the concern to everyone. And honestly, I mean, in 30 seasons of coaching, which is, boys and girls, so it's not necessarily 30 years, but in 30 seasons of coaching, there have been times I've had some captains that are just horrible. They're just awful, and they're cliquey and they're power hungry, and they want to sort of lord it over the other kids. And that's just not going to work. So I've actually, over the years, had to remove team captaincy from some players because they just didn't wield that authority very well. So I would say tip number one, look at your team and look at where is the number one biggest threat to the unity of the team, and work on that one big thing first.
Yeah, I would take the captain issue another step, because I learned this many years ago too, because the captain can be extraordinarily helpful to you or a hindrance, as you just sort of described. And a lot of problems arise because the captains don't have a bullet sheet or a laundry list of things that are expected of them. So what I started doing years ago, not that long ago, probably closer to about 8 or 10 years ago, I have a list of the captain's responsibilities before we vote on the captain. So I pass that out. I say, before you decide who you want your captain to be and whether you want to be a captain, here's what your job's going to be. It's not just an honorary deal that at the end of the year you get a plaque that says captain or whatever. You have a responsibility. And so I have a laundry list of things that include what you just talked about, Bill, both the responsibility, welcoming, the work ethic, the attitude, all the things that you want. And the fact that I would put an asterisk at the end of your laundry list that says, if you are not capable or you are not mature enough to subscribe to these responsibilities, I will demote you out of the captainship and we'll put somebody else in. Never had to do that, but because they know what was expected, and if a player didn't want to be captain, then obviously they'd come to me and say, look, I really don't feel, even though I may have been voted to be captain, I don't want to be captain. Okay, fine, let's move on. So that would be the first thing, to make sure your captains do have that. And I've been very fortunate with pretty well-rounded young ladies, young men, that I didn't have a lot of problems. One of the greatest examples was when I had a young girl who was a sophomore, had never played before, wanted to come out. She had no friends, so she ate lunch in her older sister's car, all by herself, never had a friend. Her mom asked me if she could come out for tennis. She'd never played before, but really kind of showed an interest. I said, absolutely. My girls, my captains, not only welcomed her, but they invited her to dinner and they went bowling with a bunch of the team members. That changed that young lady's life, not just for the tennis component, but for her life changed dramatically as a person, as a student, as a friend for life among some of these girls on their team. So you never know, but that's where your captains and your leaders can step up. And then I talk to the whole team as if they're all captains. They all have a responsibility to each other, to myself as I hold the final word on what is going to happen, whether it's uniforms, whether it's teammates for doubles, et cetera, et cetera. they have to respect that, and I will consider their input always. But I leave it a personal responsibility for every one of these girls here to make sure that they have an equal hand in working together and minimizing the drama that typically comes with any boys or girls team.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. So, yeah, because your captains can be helping you solve drama, or they can be creating it, right?
Yep.
So, um, so yeah, I mean, I think it can't be emphasized enough that part of one of the major ingredients would be the captains. I'll give you an example. I had a I had a team that was very talented, and yet they had, before I got there, they had the reputation of losing in the first round of the playoffs every year. So they would win league, and that was enough for them. And then they would go into the playoffs, and they just really didn't achieve much in the playoffs because most people are like, well, I got to get ready for my testing coming up at the end of the year, to get into college. So, whatever. But so anyway, I took over this team, and for whatever reason, these girls really wanted to win. Some of them did, but I had two girls that were skipping practice, and they were lying to me about where they were, and had dealt with them a couple of times. And then my captains came to me and said, "Hey, coach, there's a lot going on behind the scenes at school that you don't even know about. So here's what we want to do. We would like to have a team only meeting that we run." Right. And I'm like, okay, you mean I can leave early? All right. I'm good with that. So anyway, so I said, well, not immediately, but tomorrow we will do this. All right. Um, so we planned it out, and with about 20 minutes left to go in practice, I said, hey, we're going to have a team only meeting right now. I'm leaving. Your captains are in charge of that. And so the report that I got was that there was, that people were angry, and they were arguing, and there was crying, and then there was forgiveness, and then they all came together, and that, I think the cool thing that happened out of that was we went into the playoffs as the 10 seed, and we beat 7 like it was nothing. And then we beat 2 in a thriller. But all the cumulative drama that had happened during the season sapped our strength, and we just ran out of gas at the end. But even that was a lesson, because it was like, look, if you expend all your energy on all this drama, you don't have enough energy to go and actually compete, right? So at the year-end banquet, I said, look, here's what we've learned. Exactly that. Now, next year, let's just be unified from the start and have everybody going in the same direction. And there were a couple other things they learned about how to manage their time and all that. So the next year they went in as the number 1 seed, and even with a big target on their back, they won everything, and they just smashed everybody. And it was really awesome. And then the girls even acknowledged, it was the lessons that we learned the year before that helped us succeed at this level. So the fact that they learned that's something that they take with them for the rest of their lives. They learned how to overcome adversity by coming together as a team, and then using that as a springboard for success. And that's something that will come up again in your life.
Yeah, the life lessons are numerous, and that's certainly one of them. I would say that one of the things as I got older, and this might be for you too, Bill, as we became more mature coaches, I would get very angry with my teams in my younger days if they were not responding in the way I wanted them to. And I found that multiplied, that may not have multiplied it right then, but it carried it over to a higher level. And instead of solving the problem, I was probably guilty of not ironing out the situation, because I was showing so much anger in their, again, these are high school kids. These are, 13, 14, 15, 17-year-old kids, that maturity is different. They're not there. So again, sort of like parental, how you handle your kids as a parent, is very similar in the sense that how you respond to situations with anger creates more anger. It creates more divisiveness, and I've learned to move away from that and take more players to the side and say, "Tell me what's going on," because the way you guys are handling this right now is holding us back. And so obviously, being more positive created more positivity in my team. And
Yeah.
while I won't say that we didn't have, I mean, probably on the girls' team more than the boys' team, the biggest problem was I had a couple girls that were dating, usually guys on the guys' team, but it wasn't always. But there was friction because maybe one girl liked the same boy, and that kind of thing. So you always have that brewing in some situations. But again, you've got to make sure that you're not penalizing the whole team for the actions or the drama that one or two kids are doing.
Yeah, that's demoralizing. So, in fact, in my book, The Art of Coaching High School Tennis, I essentially stole a chapter from Jim Lair, because in his book, Mental Toughness Training for Sports, he has a chapter on team unity, and you just hit on a couple of those. But now I think there are 12 or 14, and I'm going to just try to rapid fire remember as many as I can really quick. Number one, get to know your teammates, because when people take the time to get to know each other, then you create empathy. And sometimes you're surprised that the kid that you didn't know or thought you didn't like, you actually have something in common, and you see them in a new light. Or you start to understand that they struggle with something that maybe you didn't know, right? So get to know people on your team, and coaches can facilitate that by just like asking questions. How many brothers and sisters do you have, right? Are you from here originally? I mean, where did you come from? So you get some really surprising answers to some of those questions. Another one that you just said is positivity and negativity is highly contagious, right? Another one is get your attitude right before you enter the gate. And I don't know how many times I've had players who are coming into practice and they're having a horrible day, or they're having a horrible attitude, and I'll go up to them quietly and I'll go, "Hey, I got an idea. Why don't you go back out?" Go back out and do whatever it is you need to do. But when you walk back in, be ready, right? Because and it'll like, is there something you want to talk about? Because I can give you a moment. But anyway, and a lot of times that's really an interesting thing, right? Mutual respect is an absolute non-negotiable. So I will not tolerate any disrespect between my players. And so right now I'm coaching a middle school co-ed team. And so, in middle school, you're going to have some problems that way. So I've had to tell some boys pretty much directly, stop teasing those girls, right? That, that is not helping you. It's not helping us. And then, each person's effort level makes a big difference, because, especially when they're an influential player on the team. So I've had to go to my number one player and say, you're not giving enough effort. And then that gives everybody else on the team, they think, permission not to give the best effort. So that's just a handful of things right there. There are many more, but, here's another good one. Encourage everyone to go out of their way to help each other. So whenever they can, they should, hey, can I pick up that ball for you? Oh, look out, ball under your foot. Hey, coach, can I help you pick up those balls? Hey, it's so, the more they do that, the more they help each other, then the more unity you're going to have from that.
Yeah, it feeds upon itself. And now we usually have a lot of coaches that listen to these podcasts. So one of the things I want to give is solid things that you can do if you haven't thought of them already. So going back to the first item that you talked about, Bill, is at the beginning of the season or our first rainy day practice, I have little cards that has a person's name on it. And then it has 3 questions, like, you know, who's your favorite tennis player? What's your favorite hobby outside of tennis? Where did you live beforehand? Whatever, you know, something. Those are typical dialogue creating questions. And so every kid will come up and draw a name out of the hat. If they draw their own, they have to pick another one. But then so we put a timer up on the board if we're indoors during a rainy day, or if we're on the court, I'll just set my phone to a timer, and I'll have them, okay, find the person right now, whoever's card you're holding, go find that person. And we would do half the players, so obviously otherwise you'd have 2 people going to different people. But you know, you could assign them, or you could hand them out, or you could have them draw them. But this creates that immediate dialogue that they're not going to typically do without some little incentive to talk to somebody they've probably not talked to, especially if you've got, say, varsity and JV teams that are, you know, with me, I've got average 40 or 50 kids on a team. So, you know, some of these kids don't even interact because we're such a big team, and half the team's over here, half the team's doing this. But we do a lot of things together. So that's number one, is create a mechanism that brings your players, and then have it short, and then have them switch to another person. And so those are some of the things that you can do that create that initial, like, hey, that's great. I know that person. I can say hi to them in the hallway beyond just the tennis.
Yeah.
The other thing I would add is the consistency of the coach in expectations, meaning if you're allowing players to come late, this is something absolutely could not happen unless somebody died. We always had a joke. If somebody died in your family, okay. If you got ran over by a car, okay. That was it. You cannot use an excuse, well, I was bad in class, so my teacher kept me after class. Well, you shouldn't have been bad in class. You're going to get the ramification that I spelled out in expectations. So every player doesn't create. A lot of coaches create the animosity because they're not consistent with the discipline that they entail upon players breaking a rule. They're too soft, or they're
playing
too hard.
favorites. Playing favorites is really going to get you in trouble with.
Yeah, always will.
So, you know, it's funny. So I used to be a lot more punitive about when people come late, but I've decided it's more amusing to be very subtle about it. So like, for instance, if a player comes late, I will go up to them very quietly and I will ask them, what time does practice start?
Yep.
Right. And you know, they'll tell me the proper time, maybe. And then I ask them, tell me, what time is it now? Right. And then they usually don't even know what time it is. Right. So I'm like, well, okay, you know, can you come early? Right. And then, you know, when we do our warm-up lap, you know, there'll be so many laps, and I never announce it, but the kid who came late, I was always tell them one more, because they weren't there when they found out it was 2 warm-up laps. But when I tell them 3, all the kids who ran 2 know. And then when the next kid comes, they run 4, and the kid who ran 3 knows that the kid who came after them is running 4. So, and it's, I don't see it as like a punishment thing. I see it as kind of an amusing thing for the kids who came, you know. And I also say this, I always tell them, look, there's no such thing as on time. You are either early or you are late. And if you take the risk of trying to be on time, you might end up being late, and that's bad. So And then I'll open it up to the kids and I'll ask these questions. What does it communicate when you're early as opposed to late? And then, and it's funny how kids know the answers to these questions, right? It means that you care. You have passion. It means that you planned your time. It means that you were thinking ahead. So they come up with all these answers, and you go, yeah, 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 yeah. And then they answered it, and then they start to own it more. So,
Good point.
And for instance, on the favoritism thing, was coaching in a school that had a very well established problem with bullying, and it was almost encouraged. It was a very exclusive private school, and I guess they saw it as some sort of rite of passage that people had to be bullied by captains on teams and stuff like that. So these two really awful captains, one of whom I removed from being a captain, I mentioned her earlier, and they were incredibly mean to the number one player, and it was mostly because they were jealous because she was so much better than them, and so much more gracious and intelligent and charming, and she just had everything over them in real life. And it was just really hard to be with them. And you try to explain, hey, this is not good for the team. And they just kind of look at you like, what are you talking about? Don't you know where you are? This is what we do at this school. I'm like, yeah, I'm not going to be here much longer. So, yeah. And it is important to get on it immediately. I mean, there's to some extent, there's this thing of, okay, they're kids. They're not yet adults. They make mistakes. They're going to have to learn the hard way sometimes. But when there's something that you see that you are concerned about, it's very important that you nip it in the bud. One of the worst things that has ever happened was a girl hit another girl's car in the parking lot, and she thought no one saw. And so then she reparked her car someplace else, and then she lied about it. And I wasn't there. I didn't see that. I can't mediate this dispute, right? But now we've got this long thing about one girl hit another girl's car in the parking lot and didn't cop to it, and it's not something my athletic director wanted to deal with.
Right.
And I didn't know. I was at a loss. I mean, I guess you can put them together and go, hey, can you solve this?
Right.
But, when one girl is that committed to being dishonest, or who knows, maybe the whole thing was just made up. I don't know. So, yeah. I mean, and I think also you have to be careful with the concept of doing any kind of rites or initiations. Hazing is a very very fine line, but sometimes it can take you down the slippery slope. So I know over the years some teams just have this horrible hazing ritual, and I just don't understand what they think they're accomplishing, because to me it's like mentally and emotionally abusive. Like I've heard of swim teams that forcibly shave kids down before championships when those kids don't want that, or maybe it violates their religion, or who knows what. But sometimes people, or they're forced to drink some vile thing that will make them vomit, that kind of thing. I mean, I just never understood what the value was in all of that. And so here's a general rule. If you're doing something awful just because you had to do it, then something's wrong. Try to be smarter than the previous generation.
And for the amount of time you would spend on a hazing ritual, you can turn that into a positive time frame and do something that's beneficial and props up. Let's face the reality. We're coaching a team of players that are all going to lose matches at some point, whether unless you have the world's best player on your team, which I've been very fortunate in California to have the number one player in the U.S. on my girls team for 3 years, and the number one player from Korea on my girls team. And the number one player from Korea was my number 2 player behind my number 1 player from the U.S. So, yeah, I mean, very seldom are you going to have that world class of a player, and sometimes they're still going to play somebody that's world class like them at another school. So, losing is already built in to a sport. You will already face the negativity, the feeling of failure, or the sense of letting your team down or letting yourself down. So we already have that. We don't need to expedite a negativity feeling. So the thing you want to do as a coach is definitely be looking for ways, and there's books out there, there's things on Google that you can figure out ways that are fun, that are productive, that create much better unity, or certainly like what we do at a business meeting. There's always icebreakers, things that you can do that breaks the ice and gets kids talking to each other more on a positive note. The other thing I'll add to this, Bill, is a part of this favoritism thing is a lot of it is driven by coaches who don't use a ladder system of competition, where a kid earns their position through production, not through subjective choice by the coach saying, I feel you're better than this player. That I've never seen that work well, even though coaches love it because they have the power. And it's a yay or nay in terms of, well, if you have a team that does well, that's me because I'm the coach and I chose the team.
Yeah. Well, and I feel that way because you've been taking weekly private lessons with me.
Right. Well, that is probably the downside of a coach who does teach private lessons, which I've done, you've done, we've all done. But at the same time, if you have a ladder system, which I always, you've read my books, you know that we challenge every single day. Not every kid challenges every day just because I have 50 kids on the team, but half the team challenges every day until we have to have our top 7 set. So
let me break in on that too, because you and I differ on the challenge thing, and so Dave's system it's always in play, right? And there's merit to that, and I think in some places you can do that because of just that locale where you are, and if you're Dave, you can do that, right? But if you're me, then you don't like that quite as much. So one thing I like to do is I run the challenges, and I have all the kids challenge until there's no movement, or until like 1 week ahead of the regular season. And then I want, for a week, I want everybody to know, you play on this court, you play on that court, you play on that court, you play there. And then the familiarity of your surroundings makes a big difference. So if you're always going to have Steve on your right and Jason on your left, that's cool, right? And you always know you're going to play on this court. And so like on some of the places that I've coached, there are very specific cracks in certain places on the court. So knowing your court is really important, right? So like at this one school, on the number 1 court, there was like a break in the asphalt, and there was a slope in the forehand corner. So if you hit the ball deep to the forehand corner, that's a winner. It's going to be a winner every time, right? So that. So you're going for deep, going that direction, you go for that shot. So I like that. I also like the fact that sort of kids know what their role is on the team. But my caveat is this: if one player does show that they have improved, or the player above them is losing their matches and they're winning, then we're going to have a challenge. So we can be sure that that's what it really truly is. But I usually open that up only one time in the middle of the season, because then we're going to play the whole second half of the season, and that kind of leads me to the next point too, is getting the kids to cheer for each other. One thing that I've noticed almost every time, first year at a new place, we'll have a team match, and then you get kids and they're doing their homework and they're chit-chatting, they're sitting this way, but the match is over there, or they might even have their back turned to the match. And I'm like, aren't you a sports fan? There's your team right there. You gotta root for these people. But that's something that is part of transforming this individual sport into a team sport. And selling that to the younger players and saying, look, you guys are JV and there's the varsity playing. Your time's coming. So cheer for these guys, because then when you're varsity, then you will have a reasonable expectation that you will have people cheering for you. So, that's how it's going to work here. And I don't know how many matches I've seen where we're the visiting team and we're cheering, and it gets down to the last match and all the home kids have all left. And and then we win the match because the home kid feels overwhelmed because of the cheering. So, that's where it pays off to have that unity of cheering for each other, trying to lift each other up, and then, another thing is, and this goes along with something you said earlier, after a match the next day, I will say, all right, hey, how many people saw Stefan play? And a few people will raise their hand, and I'll go, all right, what were some things he did really well? And then we'll go on down the line and everybody will say something positive about a player that played, right? And then we won't get into the negatives. I might come up with some cumulative things as a team. We need to improve at this. If a certain player needs to improve something, I will go to them quietly. So that's another thing as a coach you can do. Praise publicly and criticize privately.
Yep. Well, let me jump in here now, because there are some things every coach can do to do exactly what you just talked about. We chart matches. So our JV players chart the varsity matches. So it's a very simple charting, errors on the forehand, errors on the backhand, errors on the serve, winners, errors at the net, et cetera, et cetera. And so now the player has to, at the end of every rally either ends with a winner or a loser. I mean, you either won the point or lose the point. So you want to create interest in a player. You got to give them something to get them interested in, and that is to keep them actively engaged with a player's match for one set. We only do it for the one set out of the 2 out of 3 sets. And so one of the things that I've found that really helps is, number one, the kid is watching the match with a lot more interest than if they were just watching the match. Number one. Yeah. Number two, at the end of the match, the varsity player must come off the court and sit with the JV player and go over their stats. Now the JV player has some authority to say, this is what you did. You had this many double faults. You had this on the do side, none on the ad side, or whatever. And now the JV player has a buy-in to saying, I helped this varsity player. And a lot of times we'll have our varsity players chart our JV players. We don't have them all. It's not equal just because there's so many matches in a match, but that is one way to create that interest level and have players watching to learn in a way that you're telling them you're watching to learn without telling them that's what they're doing.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. That is really an amazing thing. It can't be understated, overstated how important that is, because so the more you can create more engagement between the players, the better. One time I had a team, and I had a lot of my better players were actually very hard on themselves. They were very self-critical, and man, for all the world, I just couldn't get them to lighten up for quite some time. And then I got the idea of having them play a doubles tournament where the best player had to play with the worst player, and the second best player with the worst. but I kept my normal varsity doubles teams together. So they were actually the favorites, right? Oh, Darren Anderson has commented on YouTube. He says, "Do you have a match recording form you can share?" So
I do in my book. If anybody wants to message me, I can send them a PFD of or a Word doc. I can't remember.
PDF, yeah.
Yeah, PDF.
So,
sorry.
So yeah, back to my point. Wait, what was I talking about?
Oh, God, getting old sucks, doesn't it?
So yeah, what was I talking about? So the more you can create engagement. Oh yeah. So we played this tournament. That's what it was. We played this tournament, and then a funny thing happened. You know, the number one player playing with the worst player, he was just so supportive and helpful to the other kid. And on down the line, all these kids who were really hard on themselves were very pleasant and helpful with their partners because they wanted to win. It was going to be a badge of honor if they could take out a varsity doubles team, right? Playing with the worst player on the team, right? But they had to make that happen. And we got done with that. And I went, look, guys, look how nice you were to those guys, right? And yeah, they're not the best players on the team. Now, hey, why don't you try to be nice to yourself like that? And it helped them realize that they were being negative. And, you know, part of that is that, so a player's internal negativity towards themselves can negatively affect the team.
Yep.
You know, because then a lot of energy kind of comes out of players because everybody's trying to encourage them, but they're so busy imploding and they don't listen. And then their teammates get frustrated. They just wish, you know, so-and-so could get out of their head. You know, it's a tough one, but you know,
let me throw something out there, Bill. Let me jump in there because you talked about how you can create situations where your upper level players are doing something with the lower level players. We talked about charting matches, and there's another thing that I do. We do a lot of toss and block drills, especially for the volley, but a lot of partner fid drills. That doesn't matter if one player is your number one player and the other one's number 55 on your team. Toss and block drills are not dependent upon the ability of both players. So usually 3 days a week, we do about 5 to 10 minutes of a toss and block drill, and we'll divide our team in half and then bring up. So let's say I've got 50 girls here. So number 26 would move up to the number one girl, number 27 to the number two, and so on. And then we would do toss and block where they'd toss underhand, they'd block a backhand volley for 25 shots, forehand, then they'd switch and the other player would toss. So again, working on things that you can bring your players together to do something as a team is huge. I really attribute this type of drill where the team is working together on something that benefits both, but yet you can now put a low level player with a higher level player. And the thing that's probably most valuable is how often the higher level player will describe teaching the stroke to the lower level player, hearing it from a fellow player rather than from me as a coach. So do not minimize the fact that you can do several drills, drop feed drills where you're working on cross court ground strokes with two people with one person in the middle, drop feeding two balls. Those of you who have been on my YouTube page have seen several of those. But those are ways that you can create that. Again, this is one of the reasons why I've had extraordinarily few times ever in my 48 seasons of having problematic teams. And I think you put all these little factors, these little puzzle pieces together, then you minimize. I'm not saying it eliminates it, but it does minimize it and makes the problem solving a lot easier when the problem does come up. So I just want to throw that one out there as well.
Yeah. You know, and another thing that you can do is make use of your rainy days. So now, you know, some facilities don't have a place for the tennis team to go, you know, so like recently I was at a school where volleyball was still in season, and then you had the basketball team still practicing, and no gym time. So I go in the team room, and we played tennis Jeopardy, and here are my categories. We have doubles trouble, right, which is questions about doubles. We have Tinder, which is questions about singles, right? And so having some kind of funny names to them that kind of make the kids giggle a little bit is that's up to you. And then their favorite category is dumb stuff coach says, right? And oh man, they just love to say, "I'll take dumb stuff coach says for 1,000." But the joke's on them. They think it's funny, but what they have to do is they have to repeat back things that I have already said to them over and over again, and so the joke's really on them. But it is kind of funny that they get to say that out loud in my presence, and that I am not offended by it. But that's to underline the point that there's this thing called the zone of proximal development. It's a learning theory, and basically what it means is you learn better from people who are closer to you in age, because you can identify with them better. They have learned that thing more recently, so they have greater credibility in your eyes. It also makes it seem more possible and realistic, because one of the things that we have to overcome as coaches is that players tend to idealize us. Think back to when you were a kid and you just thought, wow, how do adults do this? They go to work and they make all this money and it's really hard, and then they have to clean house, they have to parent me, they have to fix the car. How do they do it? And they look perfect. So breaking down that veneer of you as the grand poobah, the ultimate authority, and humanize it and make yourself more accessible to them. That also helps. And then invariably, one thing I do warn my players about is like, hey, if you start getting sarcastic with me, look out, because I'm coming back 10 times harder, and I'll talk about your mom. So, but having some humor, and when you have that one kid that just makes everybody laugh, give them a little space for that, which leads to one more thing. So you want to schedule your practices really well so it's airtight, because if you leave too much wiggle room, then that's when trouble will happen. But also, make sure you schedule in a good 5-minute water break so the kids can talk and they get to know each other. And if you notice that there's some particularly good bonding going on between them, let it ride. I mean, I will even tell the kids, I'm like, look, this was supposed to be a 5-minute water break, but you all look like you're having such a good time. Should we extend it by 3 minutes or 5 minutes? And then some kid will go 10. I'm like, no, you're dreaming. That you just won 3. So notice that and encourage that when that's happening, because then that's what's going to make them really want to play for each other.
So let me draw on 2 things. One, what you said was so funny about the kids seeing the parents and doing that. When my daughter was a freshman in college, I'll never forget, she texted me and goes, "Dad, being adulting is hard." Adulting is hard. And she was living on campus up playing golf for SUU and having to be in an apartment and do all the things an adult does. It was rather revealing. But at the same time, I'll add one more thing about the rainy day practices, because how critical these days are. And I emphasize rainy day practices as our way to get better than most other teams, because a lot of coaches, they're lazy, or they don't know, they're ignorant, and they like, oh, it's raining, we can't practice, I'll see you tomorrow. And I tell my kids, I love rainy days because I know we're getting better because number one, we don't cancel practice ever. And I've had situations like you did where we've had facility issues. So what did we do? In Arizona, I actually had rainy day practices in covered hallways that were outdoors. So we would do toss and block drills, down bounces, up bounces, catches, partner fed type of situations, drop shots into buckets. We'd put a 5-gallon bucket with a towel in the bottom, and they'd work on drop hitting a slice backhand drop shot into the bucket in a circle. We'd go into a classroom, do chalk talks, watch videos, do those types of things. I love the tennis trivia or the tennis Jeopardy concept as well. You can you can do a lot of cool things that stimulate the mind, as well as things that you might not do if you have the regular court room where you're outdoors on the court, that you might, because there's so many things we're working on as a team, whether it's rallying, playing points, playing matches, drilling, full court drills, and that kind of thing. But you can still do a lot. And again, if you go to my YouTube page, you'll see a lot of my gym floor practices. You can do where you put 6 girls and they're volleying one ball between the 6 girls, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, or 2 players back and forth, the catches. All these other drills are just so critical to hand-eye development, racket hand control, ball control, all those things that make you more effective as a player because you're controlling the racket better and better and better. So rainy day practices, absolutely utilize those to the max because you are getting better than the teams that are not.
Awesome. And having team events is really important too. So I love it when one or a few kids say, "Hey coach, can we have a team dinner?" And taking your kids to team tournaments is awesome. That is one of the greatest things you can do. So there's a tournament in California. It's the largest high school tennis tournament in the country. And I think they peaked at 124 teams, and I think they had 8 divisions. So you have these, you have these 16 draws or 12, and you get all these matches. It's so awesome. And then you're staying overnight in hotels. So there's all sorts of hijinks that happen, definitely you want to keep an eye on making sure that you keep it clean and all that. But, that is such an amazing time to eat breakfast together, go get lunch together, dinner, so much time at the table, that you can't replace that time. So, getting, if you have other fun events that you go do, like a bike ride or a hike or, something like that, then that's a really good way to get some togetherness going as well. So, so where do we go from here? Because it's, pretty soon we got to wrap up, but,
I'll throw out 2 last minute deals because being together. So one of the things that we would do every year is, and this may or may not apply, but I would talk to my athletic director, and when we won region or we won state or we were state champions or state runner up, during the football game, a varsity football game, during the halftime or during the quarter, actually it was in between first and second quarter usually, we would have all of our girls, and we got t-shirts for the whole team that said state champions or back to back because we never lost a match in 6 years. So we would walk out onto the field and the announcer would announce, here's your 2016 undefeated region and state champion girls tennis team or boys tennis team. That goes a long way with bringing recognition to your team, but also the kids love it to do it together. The lunches and dinners and breakfasts are priceless. Every year we do that as well. We started creating things that we would do every year that were traditions. On the way up to Salt Lake City, which was a 3 or 4 hour drive, we'd stop at this one place every year, and we'd always eat up there after the first round at this old spaghetti factory. And these, and I always brought 20 girls, even though only 10 played. I always paid for the extra rooms with the money we raised through our programs to add 2 or 3 extra rooms so I could bring 20 girls total. And again, the JV girls that are going to be varsity the next year or the year after are experiencing this fun thing that they'll look forward to every year as they move up the ladder.
Yeah.
And it creates lifetime memories for your, especially the seniors, and nothing like, you know, it all comes together at the banquet when you have your seniors talk for a minute and how they break down because they realized how memorable those events were, and the things that were said and the things that they did together and the pictures we took. We always did a slideshow. But and then the other thing I'll add is the varsity every year, our local radio station had an ESPN drive time live sports show with Devin Dixon, who was our local personality. And I talked to Devin. I said, "Hey, you want to have our tennis team on your show?"
Wow,
and
that's nice.
I mean, you talk about having your top 7 girls. Granted, this was just a varsity thing, but after they won region and then won state, or state champions or runner up, it didn't matter. They got to talk live on the air and people calling in, and again, memories and creating an opportunity. So there's a lot of all that's in my book on high school coaching mastery. But hopefully we've thrown out some ideas for you coaches out there that really create an opportunity for you to take the team one more notch.
Yeah. And I got one more too, because, you know, I was in this one league where we had our league tournament was over 2 days, a Friday and a Saturday. So Friday, the kids were off school because, you know, we had to play in this, because we were in a 9-team league. And so it's, you know, big draws, singles and doubles. So we would have a team breakfast. So if you have a big event, have a team breakfast on that morning, because that kills a couple birds with one stone. Because A, you have the team bonding thing, but B, you can manage that they are fueling themselves up because you can see if they ordered something or not, right? So, you know, you definitely want to get a nice big plate of carbs, right? Because you're going to expend a lot of energy today. So, you know, making sure that they have a massive breakfast so that they don't really have to have a big lunch later, and get there early enough that they're still going to be ready, you know, for their first match. But those are amazing times. And, you know, the funny thing is, you know, kids start to ask about it before the season's over. It's like, you know, I took my kids that tournament, and it wasn't even the end of day one. And one of the kids was like, "Hey, are we coming back here next year?" And I'm like, "I don't know. We have to make sure nobody dies on this trip still. I mean, I can't promise that. What if there's a tragedy? I can't say we're going to be back here next year." But I'm glad you're liking it and enthusiastic, but there's no promises. But, you know, it's nice that when they're having such a great time, they're like, "Oh yeah, this is a must do."
Yep.
All right.
Good deal.
Hey, thanks so much for your time. One quick note before we go is that I'm actually done with the first draft of the on-court coaching book. So, Dave, I'm going to be sending that to Dave in a little while, and then we're going to probably a couple of weeks away from publishing an ebook on how to do on-court coaching. And then this will probably become its own ebook on how to create a cohesive tennis team. Darren Anderson says, "Thanks, guys." He's watching on YouTube.
Thanks, Darren.
And that's it for today. Thanks, Dave.
Best wishes, everybody. Have a good week.
Bye.